The situation in Mississippi is deeply troubling. A mother, Nakala Murray, could lose custody of her three children nearly a year after her 11-year-old son, Adarian Murray, was shot and wounded by a police officer in their home. Jason has the story. Jason?
In a troubling turn of events, a Mississippi mother, Nichaela Murray, faces the possibility of losing custody of her three children nearly a year after a police officer shot and wounded her 11-year-old son, Adarian Murray, in their home. Sunflower County officials accused Nichaela of neglecting her children during the domestic incident that led to Adarian's shooting. The court filing suggests a history of domestic violence involving Nichaela's ex-boyfriend, John Noden, and indicates that the shooting resulted from ongoing abuse. Nichaela, shocked by the petition, views it as harassment and retaliation for her lawsuit against the city of Indianola over her son's shooting. Attorney Carlos Mordeems deems the petition outlandish, emphasizing Nichaela's status as a single mother. Despite no charges being filed against the officer involved, Nichaela's custody battle unfolds amidst ongoing legal proceedings. This story is from NPR by Jonathan Franklin on April 4th, 2024. Back to you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. According to the reports, Adarian was actually the one who called 911 seeking help during the domestic incident involving his mother, Nichaela, and the ex boyfriend, John Noland. However, instead of receiving assistance, Adarian was shot in the chest by Sergeant Greg Capers of Indianola Police Department. Infidel, I know that you have like some thoughts about this, but one of the things I want to ask you if you can just go into further in detail about that particular incident.
I find it really disturbing that Nichaela is potentially facing loss of custody of her children because she's allegedly been the victim of domestic abuse. And that in itself is very disturbing because if you read into this story, this starts with her ex-husband, who's the father of the younger sister of the young man who got shot, young boy. And it starts with him and knocking on her window at 4:00 in the morning. And so her telling her son, hey, I know that face on him. I know what that is. So call the police. So she did everything right in this situation. They want to paint this picture of, after at 4:00 in the morning and after a drunken brawl with her boyfriend. No, this is somebody she wasn't even in a relationship with, who didn't live there, who showed up at 4:00 in the morning, and she went, oh, damn, go ahead, call the police. This isn't going to be good. And yet they're going to try to make her, demonize her, and make her look like she's the bad guy. And so she's at risk of losing her children because she did the right things in a bad situation. And that right there is disturbing enough. Forget the further details, as mentioned, about the cop still being on the force and everything's fine with him. This situation reeks on every level.
It does. I get so disturbed, especially since you mentioned about the cop who shot her son in the chest. Even though her son was complying with the officers when he said, everybody come out of the room. Yep. And so when he came out, the first thing that he does is shoot him. And, if you actually see what Adarian looks like, he looks like a child. Yes. He doesn't look like a grown person. So what even would possess the cop to even shoot an 11-year-old in the first place is beyond me. And the thought that the mother, Nichaela, is just not getting justice, but more likely, because of her lawsuit, is getting like a retaliation thing happening, is what I conjecture is really going on. But I want to go to you, Jason, because the court filing these accusations of her neglecting her children during the domestic issue is basically what they're actually, doing in order to demonize this woman.
Yeah.
But I think it actually overlooks a broader context.
Yeah.
I would like to really know your thoughts about that.
I don't know if y'all really want to hear my thoughts. This makes me fucking sick. This whole thing is like some shit from a crime drama where like a corrupt police force is conspiring to cover up actions of one of their worst guys. They get away with it because victims are poor, marginalized, people of color. In this movie, in a movie, a hero or a group of heroes, they would emerge, they take on these fucking corrupt group of scumbags, and a couple people might die, there'd be heartache, there'd be suffering, blah blah blah, but there would be resolution, but and something would change. Sadly, life isn't a movie, and I guess everybody's kind of stuck with us for, trying to say something about it, I guess. This is a system that targets the poor. This is a system that targets Black people. We got to say it. It's a fucking real thing. They target Black women. They target people of color in general. They still they target those who have not, and they drag people through hell, drain our bank accounts because it's, low hanging fruit. This is a poor single woman with a shit bag for at least a father of one of her kids. God knows what else she got to fucking deal with, and then they're going to drag your good name through it, and they're going to do it to cover up for the filth that they fucking peddle and promote. It's really fucked up because we pay to protect these people. We have literally armed military style enforcers shooting children. My kid just turned 12. I know what a fucking 11, 12-year-old kid looks like. They look like a fucking kid. Unless you're just somebody, I don't know, you're 6'6" or 6 foot. That's, you see that one kid, they're still obviously a kid. Like they look like a giant kid. For him to do that is fucking disgusting and suspect. It'd be interesting to see what that guy has done in the past, or if he's even been around. They're penalizing her to cover up what they did, to distract from it. And this makes me sick. These are people who are untrained. These are people who, after, depending on, whatever, within a year, you're unleashed on the fucking streets with a gun. And quick anecdote, and I'll shoot it back to you. I was offered the chance to, because I fight and train and coach MMA and other things, and I was offered a position in the Houston Police Department to train new recruits how to do hand-to-hand combat by a friend of mine who's the HPD that I've trained with. My kid calls him Uncle, so his name, it's a good friend of mine. I was declined, and even though his uncle's a hiring officer, I was denied because of visible tattoos. And the thing is, the reason my buddy, I'm working not to say his name, the reason my buddy wanted me on there is because the shit like this happens. These people are terrified. They've never been in a fist fight in their life. They've never been in any type of stressful situation. In a lot of cases, these people aren't even like physically prepared to deal with these situations. A lot of the requirements, it's not like the military where you have specific physical requirements. There are people in the police force walking around with loaded weapons, multiple other weapons meant to maim and harm, who physically have to use those weapons because they can't rely on their physical strength, and they have no skill. They've never, I don't know. So it's really repugnant that people who don't understand violence are allowed to do violence with immunity. And it makes me fucking sick. And that's the nicest way I can put it. That's all I got to say, Cynthia.
You bring up a very valid point about people who happen to be in the field who basically wrought violence, and violence begets violence.
Of course.
And they're not trained to deal with these particular situations. And even like, I completely agree with you when you talked about the system itself targeting, Black Americans, people of color, people from marginalized communities. And the crazy thing about it is that the court that actually brought the charges, the AG, is a Black woman. The sergeant that shot Adarian is a Black man.
Of course.
And Indianola is, predominantly an area with mostly African American people, and yet we're still dealing with the same systemic injustices that you would see in just about any city in the United States. I want to come to you, Helen, because you know we talked about stuff like this before on the nonprofits, really highlighting systemic issues within law enforcement. I know that we even covered, a lot of the different police shootings, like um, George Floyd, and I believe that we also covered some the young man that got killed in Georgia. I believe that we even brought up Breonna Taylor, Tamir. Just like one name after another of all these people who ended up
Mhm.
losing their life just because they had an unfortunate encounter with law enforcement. And I want to get your thoughts and to see, like, where's your head at when you hear all this stuff?
Oh, where's my head? It's a lot. I'm getting like, we all know, we've done this for a while. We've been talking about this, forever, about like the systematic racism that exists in police departments, and it's the same story over and over again. Cop sees black person, shoots black person. No thinking. It's just a quick, drawing of the gun, and boom, someone's maimed or dead. And Jason, you brought up a really good point. That's something that I didn't really even think about, that these people have never even been in a fight. I've never been in a fight except for like a girl fight when I was like 13. I wouldn't be able to be in a fight, and if I, and then they were in a job that's highly stressful, every domestic situation, you don't know what you're walking into, and what are you going to do? Because like cops are humans, and humans are fallible, and humans make mistakes over and over again. And if you don't have proper training, you don't know how to de-escalate, you don't know how to properly vet of what's going on. When is excessive force needed? When it is not needed? Is there something in between? How do we assess those situations? If you get none of that training, but you have a loaded weapon that that gives you more authority and more power than the person that's across from you, bad things happen. And unfortunately, the rhetoric comes with people, people that are poor, people of color, that are the ones that are suffering the most from this, and it's frustrating as hell. And we all hear the same arguments. These places are more prone to crime. People of certain skin colors are more prone to crime. All that bullshit that we've always heard, and it's like, well. And like, yes, there are areas that have higher crime rates are poor. You know why? Because there's lack of access to education. There's lack of education to jobs, lack of education to resources. And guess what happens? People still got to eat. People still got to take care of their kids. People still have to be able to turn the water on. So what do you got to do? You end up doing crimes to make those things happen. And that's going to create an environment where other people are also going to live in the environment that are, fighting tooth and nail for what they need. And those type of situations are going to erupt. And the cops come in, and instead of actually addressing the systems that are in place, they're causing these things to happen. They just do it based on a generalization by a whole group of different people, that even people that look like them. And it's disgusting, because it's about power. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I looked up some statistics on the rates of hate crimes that happen in the United States, and it's disgusting. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit more, but I'll go into that when I talk again. So I'm going to just sit here and kind of stew, and I'm like this poor mom.
No, don't too. And the reason why I say that, because I think you bring up a really valid point, especially when we're talking about proclivity to crime versus lack of resources.
Mhm.
I just like to say that like one of the number one states that has like the highest poverty rate is Mississippi. And you have a large amount of people who are living at or below the federal poverty line that happen
Yep.
to be African American.
Mhm.
And when you have something like that, you are going to see communities that are often over policed and
Mhm.
under resourced. So no, I want you, let's talk about statistics. Because like I think that one of the straw man arguments is that when you see people are experiencing something like this and they happen to be of a certain race, there's all of a sudden these different tropes that comes out because of it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so disingenuous because like the main things that they're not necessarily using is data that has been, collected, and also even keeping in mind that no matter what skin color, group, ethnicity, you name it, whether if you speak the language of that country or not, if you are in an under-resourced area, that under-resourced area and the level of poverty is going to have a higher crime rate.
Yep.
It's part of our evolutionary wiring to survive. So if that means that I got to break the law so I can eat and I can feed my children, that's what's going to happen. So yes, talk more about that, Helen.
So, and like, you brought up Mississippi, and we just talked about that a few weeks ago about how the governor cut resources and food funding to children in Mississippi. So how the cycle of shit just keeps feeding each other. It's great. It just keeps going round and round. Anyway, so I got this from the U.S. Department of Justice. These are FBI releases 2022 hate crime statistics. So this is the most recent one I could find. So bias motivation categories for victims of single bias incidents in 2022. So based on race, ethnicity, and ancestry is 59.1%. So that was the highest of hate-related crime is done for people based on race, and that is a 59.1%. This is higher than, and the rest is relatively small. Religion was 17.3%, sexual orientation 7.2%, gender identity 4%, disability 1.5%, and just general as a general identifier at 0.9%. So victims of hate crime incidents, there's 11,208 single bias incidents involved with 13,278 victims and 346 incidents. A total of 434 victims were targeted because of more than one bias. So it's a combination of factors that we're now talking about. So, hopefully we'll link this in the doobly-doo on when this comes out on YouTube. But the single bias incidents, you can see the chart that the highest is based on race, ethnicity. It's the highest. It's 59.1%.
That's terrible.
And it's terrible and disgusting. And this is the thing. These are victims. These are not perpetrators. These are people that are being attacked. Either, and we're talking about law enforcement, but this just happens in general. If you happen to look like someone that doesn't look like you, and you are also fed the narrative that this particular group is more violent than you, less civilized, they have no motivation, whatever, racist, terrible shit that was put out there by some narrative that's just someone that's trying to push an agenda and actually doesn't want to deal with the systematic problems that are going on. This is what happens. You get people that live in constant fear of the other. And then now we have law enforcement that is doing the same thing and bringing that into society. And what the problem is that what really bothers me that this didn't need to happen. And now the reason why this woman is being sued because she's making it stink. Because she's suing the police department. She is like, you caused this. You caused the mental, physical, and emotional damage to myself and my child, spinning a narrative that I was domestically abused when I wasn't. So this way you don't face consequences.
No, she was domestically abused, but that's
Yeah,
not
but
the
I
reason
mean,
why
like
she
not
could
in that
lose her
particular
children.
incident.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, not in that
like,
particular incident at that time. So that's what
Right.
I.
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like, basically, we just have like a list of victims here, and not only are these victims not getting justice, they're also being demonized. So I have a question to ask to Infidel and then to Jason. Do you believe that Nichaela is being targeted, and why? Infidel
I
first, you and then
definitely,
Jason.
I definitely believe that she's being targeted. If for no other reason, I think some of the facts of the case lend that out because the police kicked in the door before it was answered. They had previously been told there were no weapons in the house and also that the ex had left. So they were made aware of those. And I understand you still have a sense of mistrust going into this situation. But knowing those things and an 11-year-old boy running out towards you with his hands up, yes, there was a huge failure there, whether it's communication, a lapse in judgment, which means he should not be doing the job he's doing, or a lack of training, a combination of all of them. However, this plays out, the city bears a responsibility for this. And I think that they're trying to pass the buck. So, yes, I think they're using this completely and totally to say, look, we got this poor woman. I mean, you talked about her other situations. One of the children there is her nephew. She's taking care of her nephew as well. So she's got a lot on her plate. And here we are saying, okay, we can just bury this. We can bury her. We can bury this. And that's what I think is going on.
I agree. I mean, I think it'd be foolish to not just kind of call what's going on. I think it makes it easier to do something like this to somebody because of the community. And then it makes it easier to justify whenever the people who perpetrated look like the people they perpetrated against. But what we understand from studying groups of people is that internalized phobias, internalized racisms, internalized things like that are within group tend to be stronger than out group issues. So what I'm saying is this is, and it's funny, even talking to my buddies at the gym, there's a lot of internal hatred, it seems, within specific cultural communities. You can see it, and namely within, like my buddy has talked about. I know Cynthia has probably talked about this before, and studies show there's a lot of internalized racism within the Black community and a lot of competition that is caused by the majority, that causes people within outgroups and within marginalized communities to compete with each other within to show how not they are those people. You know what I'm saying? So earlier, before we recorded this, we were talking about the trials of whiteness in the early 20th century in the United States, where people would apply for white status. That same mentality is still carrying over. It's called something different, but it's the same push. It's the same push to say, I'm not like these people. These people, you make them an outgroup, and then you target them, and then the oppression faced by people generally from their perceived group is generally worse. And it's generally harsher and generally more vicious. You see it within specific communities. You see more hatred and separation and victimization within, quote, groups that we see than you do one group versus another group. And this is a very understood thing within sociology and group psychology, and through most people's anecdotal experience who is part of a marginalized group. So I see you're nodding your head, Cynthia. So yeah, I mean, we've talked about this stuff before. So that's how I feel about it. I feel like it's over victimization. It's more dramatic. That's what I said before. It just sounds like a fucking movie situation. I'm going to shoot your kid and then I'm going to take your kids. What the fuck? If that doesn't show two entities interacting in ways that they shouldn't, multiple entities, most likely you have the judicial, it's terrible. These are people who all know each other, work in small, have grown up around each other and are fucking doing a thing. It's gross. So that's how I feel about it. It's fucking gross.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, especially when you're talking about outgroups and basically how, narratives are perpetuated upon them. by dominant society in order for them to do everything in their power to show that they're not like those
Yep. Of
you
course.
know.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, like, I gosh, we will be here for another hour and a half for me to talk about
Yeah.
all
I'm
the
sorry I brought it
anecdotal
up.
evidence that I have concerning that as well, but we don't have time for that.
Nope.
But one of the things that I really do find very concerning about this entire case is the lack of accountability for the police officer involved. And despite the grand jury determining no criminal conduct on behalf of the capers rather, and no charges being filed, questions linger about the use of force and the decision-making process that led to Adarian shooting. And this lack of accountability only adds to the sense of injustice felt like by Nichaela and her family.
Mhm.
And furthermore, the timing of the court's actions concerning Nichaela and this filed lawsuit that she had against the city raises serious concerns about fairness and also impartiality within the legal system. I know we talk so much about Lady Justice being blind, but in actuality, she is not. And the reason being is because those blinders come off depending on where and what you are as far as like your positionality in America. And it's essential that Nichaela receives fair treatment from the court and that the justice system is served not only for her family, but also to address broader issues of police accountability and also systemic injustices. But will be a further injustice, dear viewers, if you don't watch more of Nonprofits content. So click here.